An orphan boy gave away his only blanket, the one possession that stood between him and death on the coldest night of winter. What happened next sounds impossible. But months later, this act of pure selflessness didn't just save his life. It made him rich beyond his wildest dreams. And the most shocking part? The wealth that came wasn't just about money. It was about something far more valuable. This is how it all began. Marcus was 12 years old, and he owned exactly one thing in the world that mattered. It was a blanket. Not a nice blanket, not by any stretch of the imagination. The fabric was thin, worn through in places, patched with mismatched thread where it had torn and been hastily repaired. The blue dye had faded to a washed-out gray in some spots, darker and almost navy in others where the sun had never touched it. One corner was permanently stained with something he could no longer remember. But it was his. More than that, it was the last piece of his mother. She had wrapped him in this blanket the day he was born. That's what the nurse at the hospital had told him years later, when he was old enough to ask questions about a mother he'd never known. She died when he was 3. Pneumonia, they said, though he'd never fully understood what that meant. What he understood was absence. What he understood was that this blanket had been wrapped around her too. On cold nights when she held him close and whispered things he couldn't remember, but somehow still felt. His father had left before Marcus even had memories to lose. Gone. No note, no explanation. Just a void where a parent should have been. His grandmother had raised him after his mother died, but she was old and tired. And when Marcus was 9, she simply didn't wake up one morning. After that, there was no one. The foster system was supposed to catch him. It didn't. There were too many kids, too few beds, too much paperwork, not enough people who actually cared. By the time Marcus was 11, he'd learned to slip through the cracks so completely that the system seemed to forget he existed. He'd lived in shelters, on the streets, in abandoned buildings, in the back rooms of sympathetic shopkeepers who let him sleep for a few hours before moving him along. He'd learned which restaurants threw out food at closing time, which parks had water fountains, which alleys were safer than others. And through it all, he'd kept the blanket. It was November when things got worse. The temperature started dropping earlier than usual that year. Marcus could feel it in his bones. The kind of cold that didn't just make you shiver, it made you forget things. Forget your own name. Forget why you were fighting so hard to stay alive. Forget that there was anything beyond the immediate, desperate need for warmth. He'd found a spot under a highway overpass where the concrete still held some of the day's heat, and where a concrete pillar blocked most of the wind. It wasn't much, but it was shelter. He'd wrapped himself in the blanket every night, pulling it tight around his shoulders, tucking it under his body to insulate himself from the cold ground. The blanket was thin. It barely kept out the chill. But it was something. It was the difference between uncomfortable and unbearable. December came fast. By the second week, Marcus was rationing everything. He'd found a spot behind a grocery store where they sometimes left slightly damaged produce in a bin. A bruised apple, a head of lettuce with brown edges, a banana that was almost black. He'd learned not to be picky. He'd learned that hunger was a negotiation. You could quiet it temporarily with almost anything, if you were desperate enough. But the cold wasn't something you could negotiate with. His fingers had started turning white at the tips. He didn't know what that meant exactly, but he knew it wasn't good. His teeth chattered so hard at night that his jaw ached. He'd stopped feeling his toes weeks ago. He told himself that was fine, that as long as he couldn't feel them, they couldn't hurt. It was a lie, he repeated to himself every night, wrapped in his blanket, shaking so violently that the thin fabric trembled with the force of it. The other homeless people he sometimes saw around the city had warned him. "Winter kills kids like you," an old man named Ray had told him, not unkindly. "Seen it happen. You gotta find a shelter, you gotta get inside." But Marcus had tried the shelters. They were crowded and loud and full of people who wanted to know his name, his history, whether he had family. They asked questions he didn't want to answer. They made him fill out forms. They looked at him with pity that felt worse than hunger, worse than cold. And they always eventually sent him back out, because there were rules. And he was too old for some of them and too young for others. And he didn't fit into any of the categories they had space for. So he stayed on the streets. By mid-December, Marcus had started to feel like he was living in a dream. Not a good dream, a nightmare that he couldn't quite wake up from. His thoughts moved slowly. His body moved slower. He'd find himself sitting under the overpass, wrapped in his blanket, and realized that hours had passed, and he couldn't remember what he'd been thinking about. Sometimes he'd catch himself staring at nothing, his mind completely blank, and he'd have to shake himself awake. Stay alert, he'd tell himself. Stay alive. But staying alive was getting harder. The blanket had become both his greatest comfort and his greatest liability. It was the only warmth he had. But it was so thin that it barely made a difference. On the worst nights, when the temperature dropped below freezing, Marcus would wrap it around himself and still feel the cold seeping through, relentless and patient, like it was just waiting for him to give up. He'd started having dreams about his mother. Not real memories. He didn't have enough of those, but dreams that felt real. In them, she was wrapping him in the blanket, and it was warm and thick and endless. She was singing something he couldn't quite hear. He'd wake up shaking, and the blanket would be damp with his sweat, and the cold would be waiting for him just outside the thin fabric. 3 days before Christmas, Marcus reached a point where he understood, with a clarity that cut through the fog in his mind, that he was going to die. Not eventually, not someday. Soon, maybe in a week, maybe in a few days. The cold was winning. His body was losing. He could feel it happening in slow motion, like watching a candle burn down, knowing exactly when it would go out, but unable to stop it. He'd made peace with it, in a strange way. Death seemed like it might be warmer than this. Death seemed like it might be rest. And then he heard the woman screaming. Marcus jerked awake at the sound. It wasn't the usual noise of the city. Car horns, sirens, the distant rumble of traffic. This was different. This was raw. This was human. A woman was screaming. He pulled the blanket tighter around himself and peered out from under the overpass. The snow had started falling an hour ago, and it was coming down hard now. Thick flakes that seemed to swallow sound. The world had turned white and silent, except for that voice cutting through it like a knife. "Please, help! Someone, please!" Marcus knew better than to get involved. That was rule number 1 on the streets. Mind your own business. Get involved in someone else's problem, and you became a problem too. You got arrested. You got blamed. You got hurt. He'd learned that lesson the hard way, more than once. But something in that scream, the absolute terror in it, made him move anyway. He wrapped the blanket around his shoulders and crawled out from under the overpass, his stiff joints protesting. The snow crunched under his feet, and the cold hit him like a physical blow, stealing his breath. He could see his own breath now, white clouds that disappeared into the falling snow. The screaming was coming from a few blocks away, somewhere near the old warehouse district. Marcus moved toward it, his body operating on instinct rather than thought. His feet were numb, which made walking strange, like his legs were disconnected from the rest of him. But he kept going. As he got closer, he could make out shapes through the snow. A car parked at an angle, and figures. 3 of them, maybe 4. It was hard to tell in the white haze. "Give me the bag," a man's voice shouted. "Give it to me now." "No, please no. My daughter's in the car." Marcus stopped. A woman, a child, a robbery maybe, or something worse. Every instinct told him to turn around, to go back to his spot under the overpass, to wrap himself in his blanket and pretend he'd never heard any of this. But he thought about his mother. He thought about being 3 years old and having no one to protect him. He thought about what it would feel, what it would like to be a child, alone in a car, while strangers hurt the person who loved you most. He moved closer. There were 3 men, all wearing dark jackets, all with the kind of hard faces that came from making hard choices. One of them had the woman pinned against the car. She was small, thin, with dark hair plastered to her face by snow and tears. Her purse was on the ground, its contents scattered across the white snow like blood. "My wallet is in there," she was saying, her voice shaking. "Take it. Take everything. Just please, please don't hurt me. My daughter is watching. My daughter is in the car." Marcus could see the small face pressed against the car window, eyes wide with terror. One of the men laughed. It was a cruel sound. "We're not interested in your wallet, lady. We want the car. Keys. Now." The woman shook her head frantically. No, I can't. I needed to get my daughter home. Please, I'm begging you." The man raised his fist. Something broke open in Marcus's chest. Some part of him that had learned to be small, to be invisible, to survive by not mattering. It shattered. He didn't think about what he was doing. He didn't calculate odds or consequences. He simply acted. "Hey!" he shouted, his voice thin and reedy from disuse. "Hey! Police! I called the police!" It was a lie. He had no phone. He hadn't called anyone. But the men didn't know that. They froze. For a moment, everything stopped. The snow kept falling. The woman kept trembling. The child kept watching from the car window. Then one of the men turned toward Marcus, and his face twisted into something ugly. "Kid," he said, taking a step forward, "you just made a very big mistake." Marcus didn't run. He should have run. Every part of his survival instinct screamed at him to turn and flee back into the snow, back to his spot under the overpass, back to his blanket and his slow, quiet death. Instead, he stood his ground. The man came at him, and Marcus braced himself for the impact. But before the man reached him, something unexpected happened. The woman moved. She grabbed a piece of her scattered purse, a compact mirror, and threw it at the man's face. It connected with his eye, and he yelped in pain, his hand flying to his face. In that moment of distraction, the woman ran for her car and yanked open the driver's side door. "Go!" Marcus shouted at her. "Go!" The second man lunged for her, but Marcus stepped into his path. The man shoved him hard, and Marcus went down in the snow, the wind knocked out of him. But it was enough. The woman had already started the car. The engine roared to life. The third man was pulling something from his jacket, something that glinted in the streetlight. But the woman was already moving, slamming the car into reverse. The tires spun on the snow, found purchase, and the car lurched backward, nearly hitting the second man. "Damn it!" one of them shouted. "Let her go! Let her go!" The car fishtailed as the woman corrected the wheel, then shot forward, away from the 3 men, away into the snowy night. Marcus lay in the snow, gasping for breath. his ribs aching where the man had shoved him. The three men stood in the street cursing, but they didn't chase after the car. They were already turning their attention back to Marcus. "You," the first man said, the one with the injured eye. "You're going to pay for that." Marcus scrambled backward, trying to get to his feet. His blanket had fallen away in the scuffle, and it lay in the snow behind him like a ghost. He should have grabbed it. He should have run. But the men were moving toward him, and there was no time. Marcus turned and ran into the snow, his bare feet slapping against the cold ground, his breath coming in panicked gasps. Behind him, he could hear the men shouting, could hear their footsteps. He didn't know where he was going. He just knew he had to get away. He ran through the snow-covered streets, his body screaming in protest, his mind focused on one thing: survival. He didn't look back. He didn't think about the blanket he'd left behind. He didn't think about anything except the need to disappear into the white, to become invisible again, to slip through the cracks of the city and vanish. It wasn't until he was several blocks away, hidden in the doorway of an abandoned building, that he realized what he'd done. He'd given up his blanket. Not by choice, not intentionally. But it was gone, left in the snow in that street, and there was no way he could go back for it now. The men would be looking for him. The police might be looking for him too, for all he knew. He was a street kid who'd interfered with a crime. That made him a liability. Marcus sat in the doorway, shaking, and tried to process what had just happened. His body was already colder without the blanket. The wind cut through his thin jacket like it wasn't even there. His feet were numb. His fingers were white. He'd made a choice. He'd chosen to help someone else, and it had cost him the one thing keeping him alive. For a moment, Marcus thought about going back, about finding the blanket in the snow and wrapping himself in it again, going back to his spot under the overpass, going back to slowly freezing to death in a way that at least felt familiar. But then he thought about the woman's face, about the terror in her eyes, about the small child pressed against the car window. He thought about his mother, wrapping him in this blanket when he was born, not knowing she was giving him something that would outlast her, not knowing that her son would one day use it to shield himself from a world that didn't want him. And he thought about the choice he'd just made. He'd given away his blanket. He'd given away his only possession, his last connection to his mother, his only defense against the cold. He'd given it away for a stranger. And somehow, sitting in the doorway of an abandoned building, shaking with cold and fear, Marcus didn't regret it. Marcus didn't sleep that night. He couldn't. The cold was too intense, too all-consuming. Without the blanket, his body had no barrier between itself and the winter air. He curled up in the doorway, his arms wrapped around his knees, his thin jacket offering almost no protection. But something strange happened as the night wore on. The cold stopped feeling like an enemy and started feeling like a test. Each time he thought about giving up, about lying down in the snow and letting it take him, he'd think about that woman's face, about the child in the car, about the choice he'd made. "I gave away my blanket for them," he'd tell himself. "I can survive one night without it." By dawn, he was still alive. Barely, but alive. The sun rose pale and weak over the city, and the snow had stopped falling. The world was blanketed in white, beautiful and terrible at the same time. Marcus forced himself to his feet, his body stiff and aching, and made his way toward the warehouse district. He wasn't sure why. He just knew he had to see if the woman had made it home safely. He had to know that his sacrifice had meant something. It took him an hour to find the street where the robbery had happened. The snow had covered most of the evidence, The scattered contents of the purse, the tire tracks, the scuff marks from the struggle. But as he was turning to leave, he saw something glinting in the snow. His blanket. It was half-buried, frozen stiff, but unmistakably his. He knelt down and picked it up, and for a moment, he just held it. It was ice cold, rigid, useless. But it was still his mother's blanket. It was still the last piece of her. He was about to wrap it around himself when he heard a voice. "Marcus?" He spun around. Standing a few feet away was a woman. Not the woman from last night, someone else. She was older, maybe in her 60s, with gray hair and kind eyes. She was wearing a long coat and holding a coffee cup, and she was looking at him with an expression he couldn't quite read. "I'm sorry," Marcus said, taking a step back. "I didn't steal anything. I was just—" "I know," the woman said quietly. "I'm not here to accuse you of anything. My name is Eleanor. Well, I suppose you could say I'm a social worker. I was here last night. I saw what you did." Marcus's stomach clenched. A social worker. That meant paperwork. That meant questions. That meant being put into the system, being shuffled from place to place, being treated like a problem that needed to be solved. "I don't need help," he said, clutching the frozen blanket tighter. "I'm fine." Eleanor smiled sadly. "You're 12 years old, standing in the snow with a frozen blanket, and you haven't eaten in probably 2 days. You're not fine. But I'm not here to force you into anything. I just wanted to talk to you." "Why?" Marcus asked suspiciously. "Because," Eleanor said, "what you did last night was extraordinary. You put yourself in danger to help someone you didn't know. That takes a kind of courage that most adults don't have. I wanted to know more about you." Marcus didn't know what to say to that. No one had ever called him courageous before. No one had ever called him anything but a problem, a burden, a street kid who didn't matter. "The woman you helped," Eleanor continued, "her name is Sarah. She came to the police station this morning to file a report about the robbery. She told them about a boy who'd helped her. She said you saved her life. She wanted to find you, to thank you." Marcus felt something shift in his chest. "Is her daughter okay?" "Her daughter is fine," Eleanor said. "Thanks to you." They stood in silence for a moment, the cold wind blowing around them, the snow crunching under their feet. "I can't go into the system," Marcus said finally. "I've tried shelters. They don't work for me." "I know," Eleanor said. "That's why I'm not asking you to. I'm asking you something different. I'm asking you to come work with me. Not as a client, as a person. We can figure out what comes next together, but only if you want to." Marcus looked at this stranger, trying to decide if he could trust her. Everything in his survival instincts told him to run, to disappear back into the streets, to stay invisible. But something else, something that had awakened when he'd given away his blanket, told him to stay. "Okay," he said quietly. "Okay, I'll try." Eleanor's apartment was warm. That was the first thing Marcus noticed when she unlocked the door and let him inside. Not just warm, hot. Almost uncomfortably hot after months of living in the cold. He stood in the entryway, dripping snow onto the hardwood floor, and felt tears prickling at his eyes. "Come on," Eleanor said gently, leading him inside. "Let's get you out of those wet clothes." She gave him a towel, a clean shirt, and a pair of sweatpants that were too big but felt like luxury. She made him hot soup and fresh bread, and he ate like he'd never eaten before, shoveling food into his mouth until Eleanor gently suggested he slow down. "Your stomach's not used to this much," she explained. "You'll make yourself sick if you eat too fast." After he'd eaten, She showed him to a small bedroom with a real bed and clean sheets. There was a window that looked out over the city, and the afternoon light was streaming in, golden and warm. "This is your room," Eleanor said, "for as long as you need it." Marcus looked at the bed, then back at Eleanor. "Why are you doing this?" Eleanor was quiet for a moment. "Because I lost someone once, someone I loved very much. And I wasn't there for them when they needed me. I can't change that. But maybe I can be there for someone else. Maybe I can help someone like you. And that will matter." She left him alone then, and Marcus sat on the edge of the bed, his frozen blanket still clutched in his hands. He looked around the room, at the warmth, the safety, the comfort, and something inside him broke open. He cried. He cried for his mother, who died when he was too young to remember her. He cried for his father, who'd never wanted him. He cried for his grandmother, who'd loved him but couldn't protect him from the world. He cried for all the nights he'd spent in the cold, all the days he'd spent hungry, all the moments he'd spent believing that no one would ever care about him. And he cried for the choice he'd made, the blanket he'd given away, the moment that had changed everything. When he was done crying, he was empty, but it was a good kind of empty, like something toxic had been drained out of him. He lay down on the bed, pulled the clean sheets up to his chin, and fell asleep faster than he'd ever fallen asleep in his life. The next 3 months changed everything. Eleanor helped him enroll in school. She took him to a doctor who said he had mild frostbite on his toes and fingers, but that he'd recover fully. She bought him clothes that fit, shoes that didn't have holes in them, a backpack for school. She made sure he ate 3 meals a day. She listened to him talk about his mother, his father, his life on the streets, without judgment or pity. But more than that, she taught him something he'd forgotten, that he mattered, that his life had value, that the choices he made could change the world. Marcus threw himself into school with an intensity that surprised even him. He was behind, years behind, but he was determined to catch up. He read every book he could find. He did his homework with meticulous care. He asked questions in class, even though it meant admitting he didn't know things. By the end of the first semester, he was caught up with his grade level. By the end of the year, he was ahead. Eleanor encouraged him to think about his future. "What do you want to do?" she asked him one evening as they sat in the living room, the same room where he'd first felt warmth. "I don't know," Marcus said honestly. "I never thought I'd have a future." "Well, you do," Eleanor said. "And you can do anything you want with it. Anything at all." Marcus thought about that. He thought about the woman he'd helped, about her daughter, about the choice he'd made in that moment of terror and cold. He thought about Eleanor, who'd seen something in him worth saving. "I want to help people," he said finally. "I want to do what you do. I want to be there for people who don't have anyone." Eleanor smiled. "Then that's what you'll do." 5 years later, Marcus was 17 years old. He was a junior in high school, maintaining a 4.0 GPA, and he'd already been accepted into several prestigious universities with full scholarships. He'd grown tall, strong, confident. He was no longer the hollow-eyed street kid who'd given away his blanket. He was becoming someone. But on the day that everything changed, the day that transformed him from a boy with a future into a boy with a destiny, it started with a phone call. Eleanor came into his room, her face pale, her hands shaking slightly. "That was Sarah," she said, "the woman from the street, the woman Marcus had helped 5 years ago. She's found you. She wants to meet with you. She says she has something to tell you, something important." Marcus felt his heart begin to race. "What? What does she want? I don't know, Eleanor said, but she sounded excited and nervous. She asked if you'd be willing to meet with her tomorrow. She said it's about your future. Marcus agreed, though he had no idea what to expect. That night, he barely slept. He kept thinking about that night 5 years ago, about the choice he'd made, about the blanket he'd given away. He never could have imagined what was about to happen. He never could have known that one act of sacrifice was about to change not just his life, but the lives of thousands of people. He never could have known that the real story, the impossible part, the part that would make people question what they believed about fate and destiny and the power of a single choice, was only just beginning. The coffee shop was upscale, the kind of place Marcus had never been to before. Everything was sleek and modern. Exposed brick walls, reclaimed wood tables, baristas in black aprons who called out orders in a language that sounded like art. Eleanor had suggested they meet here, neutral ground, though Marcus suspected she'd chosen it because it was public. Safe. He arrived 15 minutes early, nervous energy coursing through his veins. He ordered a black coffee he didn't really want, just to have something to do with his hands, and found a table by the window where he could see the door. Sarah walked in exactly on time. Marcus recognized her immediately, though 5 years had changed her in subtle ways. Her hair was shorter now, styled differently. She wore expensive clothes, a tailored blazer, designer jeans, jewelry that caught the light. But her eyes were the same. That same warmth, that same kindness, that same gratitude that had been there the night he'd helped her. She smiled when she saw him, and it was genuine. She came straight to his table and sat down across from him without hesitation. "Marcus," she said, her voice warm, "I can't believe it's really you. You've grown so much." "You look different too," Marcus said, which was true but also inadequate. She didn't just look different, she looked successful, confident, like someone who'd figured out how to navigate the world. "I wanted to thank you," Sarah said, ordering a cappuccino from a passing barista without looking away from Marcus. "I've wanted to thank you for 5 years. I tried to find you after that night, but you disappeared. The police couldn't locate you. I thought maybe I'd never get the chance." "Eleanor found me," Marcus said. "She's been taking care of me." "I know," Sarah said. "Eleanor and I have been in touch for the past few years. She's an extraordinary woman. But I needed to see you myself. I needed to tell you what you changed." Marcus leaned forward slightly. "What do you mean?" Sarah took a breath, and he could see emotion flickering across her face. Gratitude, wonder, something else he couldn't quite name. "That night," she said, "I wasn't just a woman being robbed. I was at the end of my rope. My marriage had just fallen apart. I'd lost my job. I was living in my car with my daughter, trying to figure out how to keep us alive. I was planning to end things. That night, I was going to drive us somewhere and just let go." Marcus felt his chest tighten. "But then you showed up," Sarah continued. "You, this skinny kid in the snow with nothing to your name, risking your life for a stranger." And I realized something in that moment. I realized that if a child with nothing could be that brave, that selfless, that willing to sacrifice for someone else, then maybe I could be brave too. Maybe I could keep fighting. She paused. Marcus saw tears in her eyes. "I got help," Sarah said. "I went to a therapist. I rebuilt my life. I got a new job, a better job than I'd had before. I started a business with my savings, and it grew. Marcus, It grew into something much bigger than I ever imagined. That's amazing, Marcus said, and he meant it. But he still didn't understand why she was telling him this. Sarah reached into her purse and pulled out a thick envelope. She slid it across the table toward him. "Open it," she said. Marcus hesitated, then picked up the envelope. His hands were shaking slightly as he opened it. Inside were documents, legal documents. He began to read, and with each line, his confusion grew. It was a scholarship, a full scholarship to any university in the country. Tuition, room and board, books, living expenses, everything paid for, with extra money left over. The amount was staggering, hundreds of thousands of dollars. "Sarah, I can't," Marcus started, but she held up a hand. "That's not all," she said. "Keep reading." Marcus flipped through the documents, and his eyes widened. There was more. A trust fund, an investment portfolio in his name, stock certificates, real estate deeds. "Sarah, what is this?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "It's my way of saying thank you," Sarah said simply. "It's also my way of making sure that you have the opportunities I didn't have at your age. It's my way of ensuring that the boy who gave everything to help a stranger gets the chance to become the man he's meant to be." Marcus stared at the documents, unable to process what he was seeing. How much is this?" "Approximately $2 million, Sarah said calmly. "Invested in various places, set up so that it will grow over time. By the time you're 30, if you don't touch any of it, it will have tripled." Marcus felt the world tilt. $2 million. He'd been homeless 5 years ago, sleeping in doorways, eating out of garbage cans. And now he was being handed $2 million. "I don't understand," he said. "Why would you do this?" "Because," Sarah said, leaning forward, "you saved my life. Not just that night, though you did that too. You saved my life by reminding me that there was still goodness in the world, that there were still people willing to sacrifice for others. You gave me a reason to keep living." She reached across the table and took his hand. "And because I believe in you, Marcus, I believe that you're going to do extraordinary things. I believe that you're going to change the world, and I want to help make that possible." Marcus felt tears burning in his eyes. "I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything," Sarah said. "Just promise me one thing." "What?" Marcus asked. "Promise me that you'll use this opportunity to help others. Promise me that you'll pay it forward. Promise me that the sacrifice you made that night will inspire you to keep making sacrifices. Keep helping people. Keep being the kind of person who gives when they have nothing." Marcus nodded, unable to speak. "And one more thing," Sarah added, reaching into her purse again. She pulled out a small box wrapped in brown paper. "I wanted to give you this." Marcus opened it carefully. Inside, folded neatly, was his blanket. His mother's blanket, the one he'd left in the snow that night. "I found it the next morning," Sarah said. "I didn't know it was important at first, but Eleanor told me about it. I had it cleaned and preserved. I wanted you to have it back." Marcus picked up the blanket with trembling hands. It was soft now, restored to something close to its original condition. But it still carried the memory of that night, the weight of that choice. "Thank you," he whispered. Eleanor was waiting for him when he got home. She took one look at his face and knew something had happened. "She gave you the scholarship," Eleanor said. It wasn't a question. "How did you know?" Marcus asked. Because I've been talking to Sarah for years, Eleanor said. She wanted to do this. She needed to do this. And I think she needed to see you, to know that you were okay, that her life had meaning because of what you did. Marcus sat down on the couch, still holding the blanket, still processing what had just happened. Is this real? He asked. Is this actually happening? Eleanor sat down next to him. Yes, it's real. Sarah is a successful businesswoman now. She's built an empire, and she wanted to invest in you because she believes in you, because you changed her life. I didn't do anything special, Marcus said. I couldn't let her suffer. I couldn't let that child be hurt. That's exactly what made it special, Eleanor said. You didn't do it for a reward. You didn't do it because you expected anything in return. You did it because it was the right thing to do. And that kind of selflessness, it has a way of coming back to you. Marcus looked down at the blanket in his hands. My mother would have liked her. I think she would have, Eleanor agreed. That night, Marcus lay in bed with the blanket draped over him, and he thought about everything that had happened. He thought about the choice he'd made 5 years ago. He thought about how one moment of sacrifice had set off a chain reaction that had changed his entire life. But as he drifted off to sleep, he couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning, that the real transformation, the real miracle, was still to come. He didn't know it yet, but his life was about to change again. And this time, it would change in ways he could never have imagined. 3 months later, Marcus was sitting in a law office on the 42nd floor of a downtown skyscraper when his life changed again. The lawyer's name was Mr. Harrison, and he was old. The kind of old that came with decades of experience and the kind of gravitas that made you sit up straighter just by being in the same room with him. He had silver hair, reading glasses on a chain, and an expression that suggested he'd seen everything the world had to offer and had learned to be surprised by very little. But today, Mr. Harrison looked surprised. I've been practicing law for 53 years, he said, adjusting his glasses and looking at Marcus over the rim of them. And I have never encountered anything quite like this. Marcus felt Eleanor's hand squeeze his arm reassuringly. She was sitting next to him, having insisted on coming when the law office called. The call had been mysterious. Something about an inheritance, a will, a matter that required his presence in person. What do you mean? Marcus asked. Mr. Harrison opened a file on his desk and pulled out several documents. He held them up, studying them with an expression that hovered somewhere between confusion and awe. 17 years ago, Mr. Harrison began. A woman named Catherine Wells came to my office. She was dying. Cancer, terminal diagnosis, 6 months to live. She was alone, no family, no children, no close relatives. She had, however, accumulated a considerable fortune through real estate investments and a successful business venture. He paused, letting that sink in. Ms. Wells was very specific about what she wanted to do with her money. Mr. Harrison continued. She wanted to leave it to someone who deserved it, someone who embodied the values she believed in. But she didn't know who that person was, so she gave me instructions. She told me to wait. She told me to watch the world. And when I found someone, a young person who made a significant sacrifice for a stranger, someone who gave when they had nothing, I was to give them her entire estate. Marcus felt his heart begin to race. I don't understand. How would you know who that person was? That, Mr. Harrison said, is where it gets interesting. Ms. Wells was a believer in synchronicity, in fate. in the idea that the universe has a way of revealing itself to those who are paying attention. She told me that when I found the right person, I would know. There would be signs. There would be a clarity that couldn't be denied. He leaned back in his chair. 5 years ago, I read a newspaper article about a robbery that was thwarted by a homeless boy. The article mentioned that the boy had sacrificed his only possession, a blanket, to help a stranger escape danger. I read that article, and I thought, this might be the one. Marcus's mouth had gone dry. But I needed to be sure, Mr. Harrison continued. So I began investigating. I looked into your background, Marcus. I spoke with Eleanor here. I spoke with Sarah. I spoke with the police officers who responded to that incident. And the more I learned about you, the more convinced I became that you were exactly the person Ms. Wells was looking for. So, what does this mean? Marcus asked, his voice barely steady. What are you saying? Mr. Harrison pulled out a single document and slid it across the desk toward Marcus. It means that Catherine Wells's entire estate has been left to you, all of it. Her business interests, her real estate holdings, her investment portfolio, her bank accounts. Everything. Marcus stared at the document without touching it. How much? Approximately, Mr. Harrison said slowly, $47 million. The silence that followed was so complete that Marcus could hear the hum of the air conditioning, the distant sound of traffic from the street below, the sound of Eleanor's breathing beside him. That's not possible, Marcus said finally. That can't be real. I assure you, it is very real, Mr. Harrison said. I have spent the last 5 years ensuring that everything is legal, that all of Miss Wells's wishes are being honored, and that you are indeed the correct beneficiary. I have triple-checked every detail. This is not a mistake. Eleanor's hand was gripping his arm so tightly it was starting to hurt. But Marcus didn't say anything. He was trying to process what he was hearing. $47 million. It was an incomprehensible number. It was more money than he could spend in a lifetime. It was more money than most people made in 100 lifetimes. Why? Marcus asked. Why would she do this for me? She didn't even know me. She didn't know you, Mr. Harrison agreed. But she knew your story. She knew what you'd done. And she believed that someone who could give everything for a stranger deserved to have the means to help countless strangers. She believed that your sacrifice was a sign that you were the kind of person who would use great wealth not for personal gain, but for the greater good. He paused, then added, She left you a letter. She asked me to give it to you only after you'd accepted the inheritance. Mr. Harrison reached into a drawer and pulled out an envelope. It was old, yellowed with age, sealed with wax. He handed it to Marcus. With trembling hands, Marcus opened it and began to read. Dear Marcus, if you're reading this, it means you've done something extraordinary. It means you've made a sacrifice that has rippled through the world in ways you probably don't even understand. It means you've given when you had nothing. And that act of giving has proven to me, even from beyond the grave, that you are exactly the person I hoped would find this letter. My name is Catherine Wells, and I am dying. As I write this, I have perhaps 3 months to live. I have no family, no children, no one to leave my fortune to. For years, I've wrestled with what to do with the money I've accumulated. I could give it to charity, but that felt impersonal. I could leave it to institutions, but that felt hollow. I needed to find someone who understood the true value of giving, who understood that money is only meaningful when it's used to change lives. And then I heard about you. A boy with nothing who gave his only possession to help a stranger. A boy who made a choice that cost him everything, but who made it anyway, because it was the right thing to do. I knew in that moment that you were the one. This fortune is now yours, Marcus. But I'm giving it to you with a condition. Not a legal condition. Mr. Harrison will explain that the money is entirely yours to do with as you wish. But a moral condition. A challenge. Use this money to change the world. Not for yourself. Not for your own comfort or security. You'll have more than enough of that. Use it to help people like me. People who are suffering, who are alone, who feel like the world has forgotten them. Use it to build something that will outlast you, something that will continue to help people long after you're gone. You gave your blanket to save a stranger. Now I'm giving you the means to save thousands of strangers. Millions of strangers, if you're ambitious enough. Be the person I know you can be, Marcus. Be the person your sacrifice has already proven you are. With hope and faith, Catherine Wells Marcus read the letter 3 times before he could speak. When he finally did, his voice was shaking. I don't deserve this, he said. Perhaps not, Mr. Harrison said quietly. But Catherine Wells believed you did, and I've spent 5 years ensuring that her wishes are honored. So whether you believe you deserve it or not, it's yours. Eleanor was crying silently beside him, her hand still gripping his arm. What do I do? Marcus asked, looking at Mr. Harrison. What do I do with all of this? That, Mr. Harrison said, is entirely up to you. But I would suggest you take some time to think about it. This is a tremendous responsibility. Catherine's business interests alone require careful management. Her real estate portfolio spans 3 states. Her investments are diverse and complex. You'll need advisors, people you can trust, people who understand finance and business and the responsibility of stewardship. He paused, then added, but more than that, you need to think about what you want to do with this money. What kind of legacy do you want to create? What kind of change do you want to make in the world? Marcus looked down at Catherine's letter, then at the document Mr. Harrison had given him. $47 million. It was real. It was his. And with it came a responsibility that he was only just beginning to understand. I need time, Marcus said finally. Of course, Mr. Harrison said. Take all the time you need, but not too much time. The world is full of people who need help, Marcus. And now you have the means to help them. That evening, Marcus sat on the roof of Eleanor's apartment building, a place he'd come to think of as his sanctuary, and looked out over the city. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. The city lights were beginning to twinkle below him, thousands of tiny lights representing thousands of lives, thousands of stories, thousands of people who were struggling, suffering, trying to survive. Eleanor came out and sat down beside him, handing him a cup of tea. Are you okay? She asked. I don't know, Marcus said honestly. A week ago I was worried about college applications and SAT scores. Now I'm a multimillionaire. It doesn't feel real. It will, Eleanor said. And when it does, you'll figure out what to do with it. You'll figure out how to honor Catherine's wishes and your own conscience. How do you know that? Marcus asked. Because I know you, Eleanor said simply. I know the boy who gave away his only blanket to help a stranger. I know the young man who's worked harder than anyone I've ever met to build a better life. I know that whatever you do with this money, you'll do it with integrity and compassion. Marcus leaned his head on Eleanor's shoulder, and they sat in silence as the sun finished setting and the stars began to emerge. He thought about Catherine Wells, a woman he'd never met, but who'd believed in him enough to give him her entire fortune. He thought about Sarah, who'd invested in his future because he'd helped her. He thought about Eleanor, who'd taken him in when he had nothing. He thought about his mother, who'd wrapped him in a blanket when he was born, not knowing that one day that blanket would lead to all of this. And he thought about the future, about the responsibility he now carried, about the millions of people who needed help, who were suffering, who were alone. He thought about what he could do with $47 million. And for the first time since Mr. Harrison had told him about the inheritance, Marcus smiled. The following weeks were a whirlwind of meetings, phone calls, and a lot of soul-searching. Marcus found himself thrust into a world he had only ever observed from the outside, a world of wealth, influence, and opportunity. He met with financial advisors, investment managers, and philanthropic consultants, trying to understand the vast resources now at his disposal. Eleanor was with him every step of the way, guiding him through the complexities of wealth management, while also encouraging his vision of using the money to help others. "What do you want to do first?" she asked one afternoon as they sat in her living room, stacks of documents spread out on the coffee table. "I don't know," Marcus admitted, flipping through a brochure for a local community center. "I want to help people, but I don't know how to start." Eleanor nodded. "Why don't you think about what you needed when you were living on the streets? What would have made a difference for you?" Marcus paused, contemplating her question. "I needed stability, a safe place to sleep, food, help with school. I needed someone to believe in me." "Then maybe that's where you start," Eleanor suggested. "Think about creating resources that address those needs. A shelter, a food program, educational grants, something that gives kids like you a chance." As the days passed, Marcus began to form a clearer picture of his vision. He wanted to create a foundation focused on helping homeless youth, providing them with shelter, education, and opportunities to build a better future. With Eleanor's encouragement, he started sketching out plans. He envisioned a multi-purpose facility that included emergency shelter, a safe place for kids to sleep, eat, and feel secure. Educational programs, tutoring, mentorship, and life skills training to help them succeed in school and beyond. Job training, partnerships with local businesses to provide internships and job opportunities. Mental health services, access to counseling and support for trauma and emotional well-being. As he drafted his ideas, excitement began to replace the initial overwhelm he had felt. The more he thought about it, the more he realized he could create a space where kids could find hope, just like he had found with Eleanor and Sarah. One afternoon, Marcus and Eleanor visited a potential site for the foundation. It was an old warehouse in a part of town that had seen better days. The building was large, with high ceilings and plenty of space for their plans, but it needed a lot of work. "This could be perfect," Marcus said, stepping inside and imagining the possibilities. "We could transform it into something beautiful." Eleanor walked around, surveying the space. "It has potential, but it will require significant investment to renovate." Marcus nodded. "We can use some of the funds for that. I want it to be welcoming, bright, safe, and full of life." As they explored the warehouse, Marcus felt a surge of determination. He envisioned kids running through the halls, laughing, learning, and finding safety. He pictured the community coming together to support one another. Weeks turned into months as Marcus and Eleanor worked tirelessly to bring the vision to life. They secured the warehouse, hired architects, and began planning renovations. They reached out to local businesses and community leaders for support, sharing Marcus's story and the mission of the foundation. People responded. Donations poured in. Volunteers showed up to help with renovations. Local chefs offered to provide meals. Teachers volunteered to develop educational programs. The community was rallying around Marcus's vision, and it felt incredible. One evening, as they reviewed progress over dinner, Marcus turned to Eleanor, his eyes bright with excitement. "This is really happening, isn't it?" Eleanor smiled. "Yes, it is. But remember, this is just the beginning. The real work starts when the doors open and you start helping those kids." "I know," Marcus said, his expression turning serious. "But I feel ready. I want to make a difference. I want to be the person who helps others, just like I was helped." Eleanor reached across the table, placing her hand on his. "You already are that person, Marcus. You've shown that time and again. Just remember to keep your heart open, and you'll continue to do incredible things." As the grand opening approached, Marcus felt a mix of excitement and anxiety. He wanted everything to be perfect. He wanted the kids who walked through those doors to feel the hope and love he had found. On the day of the opening, the sun shone brightly, illuminating the newly renovated warehouse. It had been transformed into a vibrant community center, with colorful murals on the walls, cozy study areas, and a welcoming kitchen. Eleanor stood by his side as they prepared for the first group of kids to arrive. "You ready for this?" she asked, her eyes twinkling. "I think so," Marcus replied, taking a deep breath. "I just hope I can really help them." "You already have," she said, "just by being here, by believing in them." As the first kids arrived, Marcus's heart swelled. They were greeted with warmth, smiles, and a sense of belonging. He watched them explore the space, their faces lighting up with curiosity and excitement. Over the next few weeks, the foundation began to flourish. Kids came for shelter, for meals, for education, and for community. Marcus was there every day, talking to them, listening to their stories, helping them find their paths. He felt a sense of purpose he had never known before. One evening, as he was cleaning up after dinner service, a girl named Mia approached him. She was 12, with bright eyes and a shy smile. "Marcus," she said hesitantly, "can I ask you something?" "Of course," he replied, kneeling down to her level. "What's on your mind?" Do you think I could be like you someday?" Mia asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "You know, help people like you helped me." Marcus felt a rush of emotion. "Absolutely, Mia. You can do anything you set your mind to. You're already helping others just by being here." Her eyes sparkled with hope. "Really?" "Really," Marcus assured her. "Just remember, every small act of kindness matters. You can change someone's life, just like you changed mine." Mia smiled, and for the first time, Marcus saw a glimpse of the future he had dreamed of. A future where kids like Mia could grow up knowing they mattered, knowing they could make a difference. As he watched her walk away, he realized that his journey was not just about the money or the foundation. It was about the connections he was building, the lives he was touching, and the hope he was spreading. That night, as Marcus lay in bed, he reflected on how far he had come. He thought about the blanket he had given away and how it had led him to this moment. He thought about Sarah, Eleanor, and Catherine Wells, and how each of them had played a role in shaping his path. He felt grateful, not just for the wealth he had inherited, but for the opportunity to use it to create real change. For the first time in his life, he felt like he was exactly where he was meant to be. And as he drifted off to sleep, he smiled, knowing that the journey was just beginning.